Thank you for taking up. I know we are all busy, right? And thank you for taking 30 minutes of your time to be here. So this is the first Sovereign DBaaS Community Call, right? And I'm excited. I guess you are too. So we're growing, and uh, today we'll dive into the world of Sovereign DBaaS, right? A concept that has been gaining traction as organizations seek greater control and flexibility in their cloud data strategies. So we'll basically explore the motivations, right? So hence the title, the why, the what, and the how. The motivations behind its rise, right? Its core characteristics and how it's been implemented. So this is going to be a short call, 30 minutes. Obviously, we can't cover how it's been implemented in depth, but I'll give you some overview, right? And yeah, then future calls we have planned, we'll discuss with some organizations implementing Sovereign DBaaS and also tools that help organizations implementing Sovereign DBaaS. So there is a lot lined up for the future calls, and it's great to kickstart with this. So a little bit about me. I think that's the first. If you're in the community, you already know me. I'm Divine Odazie. I love smiling, and yeah, there's a picture of me smiling. So I'm a community manager, and I studied electrical electronics engineering in university. I'm a Kubernetes advocate, right? And I call myself a Kubernetes engineer, let me put it in quotes, right? And also a data on Kubernetes ambassador, right? Because there's a whole community focused on data on Kubernetes. And I've been doing stuff in AWS, and I got the AWS Solution Architect certification. So what are we going to talk about, right? Like the title says, the the why, how, and what, right? And the why is the cloud landscape, right? Follow about what is Sovereign DBaaS, then how does Sovereign DBaaS work? Then we do a little bit Q&A, right? Within the 30 minutes timeline to discuss like what Sovereign DBaaS is and like answer some of your questions, then some conclusion wrapping up. Then to get started, the cloud landscape. So this is a report, right? This infograph is from a report by a company called Flexera, right? So this is the state of cloud usage. So they have been doing surveys on the cloud adoption, right, for 13 years now, and it's been interesting to compare this report over the years, right? So there are certain trends that are very, very interesting and very fascinating. In the early days, right, when the cloud came in, all the hype and organization moving to the cloud, right? The usage of public cloud, right, was high, right? And but then again, it followed by a downward trend. So if you can see from this current state, this is the report from 2024. It says 24% of organizations use only public cloud, right? So this number was 16%, right, as out of the 2022 report. So that's just 2 years ago. But today it has risen back to 24%. So it went on a downward spiral, right, and then came back up to 24%, right? And 97% of companies use some form of public cloud, right? And public cloud we know as for those that don't know is AWS, right? Azure, they are public offerings, right? But then again, why is this trend, right? And there are two major reasons, right? We can agree on, and that's scalability and also security enhancement. The early days of public cloud was riddled with security flaws and issues, right? Hence the downward spiral. So from companies adopting to companies like going out of the public cloud, right, because of security issues. But today, like over the past few years, right, cloud providers like AWS, Azure, and all these hyperscalers, right, and also the let's say smaller cloud providers we know, they have invested heavily into security measures, and this, of course, the upward trend. But then again, in the aspect of scalability, we know that, okay, you can look at the AI, right? AI is all what's been talked about for the past 2 years, right? And like AI is not doing AI in on-prem or doing AI in a, not all organization can afford to do that, right? And probably limitless scalability that public cloud offers. So that's, we can say, the two major reasons that trend has gone upward. But then again, right, the organizations, the cloud also still face some challenges. And what are they? And these are the top challenges, both from that report, right? Managing cloud spend is the number one challenge for all organizations using the cloud, even surpassing concerns around security as at this year's report, right? So this highlights the growing complexity and financial implications of cloud usage. So cloud pricing models can be complex and varies on usage patterns, right? So everyone here have used some form of the cloud, so they can attest to some time, right? Me personally, I know how much I've paid on my personal AWS account in bills that like I can't really phantom how they occurred, right? But then again, I still have to pay, right? Which makes it difficult to forecast and control costs, right? Then again, you're doing stuff on a large scale. An ideal organization will not be, oh yeah, I may rack up $300 in a few months, but an organization, right, that have like thousands of hundreds of developers, right, think about like estimate the cost of the spend, right? And also the lack of visibility and control, right, is another reason for the struggle with the cloud spend. Right? Many organizations lack clear visibility on their cloud spend across departments, right? Like I mentioned, this leads to waste, right? When you don't know what is happening, right? You're using a managed service, right? And a managed service simplifies the way you do things, right? But then again, there are some drawbacks, right? You don't really have control over some of the way the service is designed, right? And does it fit your needs? And also, once we've noticed on the control aspect, right? When you start using a particular cloud, right? With the way their services are designed, right? Like I mentioned, you get locked in over time. I've always been using AWS. When I want to use something like in a cloud, right, public cloud, I think about AWS first, right? I've tested Azure, tested GCP, but just because of like that dependency, right, it kind of leads to dependency. And if you want to move, right, there's a ridiculous spend or you face more challenges depending on the kind of infrastructure you use, right? And for lack of resources and expertise, right, like I mentioned, but then again, during the call, you can ask any question, right, during the call. And also, before we go to the Q&A, just to make it more casual and more interactive. So on the aspect of like lack of resources, right, like we can see an expertise, right? Using a managed service doesn't mean that everything is managed from you, right? You have to do some configuration. For example, in the aspect of databases, right, query optimization, writing efficient queries, right? Because your queries can affect the long run, for example, long running queries, right? That run longer than expected. And that query is supposed to perform an action, right? That is based on a large amount of data. That leads to unnecessary resource consumption. And like lack of expertise, right, is what causes that and contributes to high cost, which all leads to the right managing cloud spend. Then managing software licenses, we can talk all day about that, right? We know about Redis software licenses. Okay, Elasticsearch is open source again, right? But they are still using, other licenses are still in place. So that brings about ambiguity, right? You don't really know, organizations are not sure what is happening, right? Beyond these top three challenges, right, that are listed, right? Governance, compliance, which are key to organizations that need to fulfill some form of data sovereignty requirements, right? But then again, how do we, like, we'll be talking about challenges and struggle, how do we tackle these challenges? So the solution, right, will be varying deployment models, right? So although like cloud has sophisticated infrastructure compared to like various organizations, right? But then again, in order to save costs, be secured, scale as you want, right? How will you achieve this? Because if you say you want to be fully on-prem, right? No organizations can be fully on-prem, right? Hence, we talk about like using all the cloud, right? Using all the possible deployment models, whether it be co-location using public cloud, deploying on-prem, right? And this graph makes that case, right? So for example, if you're deploying a workload that is feral, right? Let's say a stateless application, right? And giving an example of Black Friday, right? And you know that day there'll be a usage spike, right? So it's ideal to deploy that kind of application on a public cloud for that limitless scale, right? That you cannot really handle. Let's say if you're in a co-located environment, depends on your skill, right? And then again, while this gives you some benefits, right? You can also, for those applications that don't meet this requirement, you can put them in a co-located environment, or let's say security requirement or sensitive data, especially looking at organizations that are in the EU, right? At several times, we've been speaking with a lot of organizations over the years. And like we recently spoke to an upcoming podcast, right? I spoke with someone that works in an aerospace industry, right, that deals with planes and stuff. So you know the data, the kind of data they host, right? So they can't really use public cloud for some type of applications, right? But then again, looking at all this, right, how can an organization leverage all these deployment options, right, based on their specific workload characteristics in the most seamless manner, rather? Because now, like, a DBaaS, right? A cloud DBaaS gives you like that experience, that user experience, right? And this is the promise of Sovereign DBaaS. That's the promise of Sovereign DBaaS, to help you deploy your application where you want and how you want, right? Enter Sovereign DBaaS. And that is why we at 7 Nines, we are building a community, and I am in charge. I'm building a community of Sovereign DBaaS because that is what a lot of organizations are trying to implement, right? And before we go about what Sovereign DBaaS is, let's look at some fundamentals. So if SaaS, as we know it, right, is a subscription-based model where software applications are hosted, managed by a third party, right, offering you on-demand service for whatever software, whether it be invoicing or let's say I use a lot of I use the calculator, right, a paid calculator to calculate my finances or tax, right? So that is like a SaaS service, right? And several examples. So what is a DBaaS? DBaaS, right? Database as a service. It's basically offering managed database services, right? Without requiring the setup of physical hardware, installation of the software, and like needing much extensive configuration. Like I mentioned before, you still need to make some configurations, right? Because like AWS doesn't know what you need exactly, right? So you have to make some configuration to some extent. But that's the offering, abstracting away the hardware, installation of software, right? But then again, now next, what does sovereignty mean in a digital world? So sovereignty, I'm from a sovereign country, right? I'm Nigerian, it's a sovereign country. We control our own resources, right? We control our own data. We control a lot of things that happen in the country, right? So like when we think of sovereignty, the first thing that comes into mind is like being a country, being on its own, right? And in the digital space, right, the ability to control your own digital destiny, you can look at it as that, right? From data to hardware and like software you rely on, right, and create, and it becomes is a concern for policymakers, right? And like I mentioned, from companies in the EU, right, organizations in the EU, both in Africa, right, a lot of like I said, I'm Nigerian, a lot of talks about digital sovereignty and data sovereignty. And we have a lot of clouds, right, that focus on just sovereign cloud here in Nigeria, right, to help organizations meet those requirements. So with those fundamentals laid, right, what is Sovereign DBaaS? So in short, right, Sovereign DBaaS is a service that provides access to a database management system in a dedicated tenant in any location that meets data privacy, latency, and cost goals, basically. That's it. So in full, right, it gives you ultimate control of your data stack by enabling you to choose where you deploy your applications, right, your workloads, how you configure them, right, according to your application and organizational requirements. What's the result? Right? You can achieve the promise of open source and source available databases, right? So yes, you're deploying with RDS, AWS RDS, or AWS Aurora, or Cosmos DB, or GCP Cloud Spanner, or something like that, right? That is not really, that is a version, right? Let's say you're deploying the Postgres, Aurora Postgres. It's not really the vanilla Postgres that we have that is open source, right? It is managed and maintained by AWS, right? So hence that can lead to lock-in, and okay, if you want to migrate your data, yes, you can easily migrate your data across clouds, right, and both on-prem, but that's requires some expertise and some effort, right? Through a vendor neutral environment, right? Vendor neutral agnostic, we all know what agnostic means, in the sense that it's not really tied to any particular thing, right? So that is what Sovereign DBaaS is, to have control of your DBaaS. But next, what are the characteristics of Sovereign DBaaS? Like, what can you characterize that, okay, this DBaaS, this database as a service is a Sovereign DBaaS. It gives me that control. So there are, like, we can say there are 6 characteristics, right, on a broad sense. And the number one, which, right, you know, right, and I talked about where Sovereign DBaaS gets its name from, is governance and privacy. And this is a core characteristic of sovereign DBaaS. It's crucial, right? With the involving compliance laws, right? I don't know if you followed the weekly top 5 reads, right, that I share in the community from the last week. So you see a lot of issues and fines from government, both here in Nigeria, in the EU, in the US, right? And there are several laws and compliance laws, right, and frameworks. And additionally, like I mentioned, to give an example from Nigeria, right, also examples in US, various countries also have their like own data residency laws, right, and industries, right, like aerospace I mentioned, have specific regulations that exist, right, and Sovereign DBaaS offers full control over data location, easy migration for compliance. Aside from Nigeria, like I mentioned, there's as an example, France, right? Aside from all the countries in EU, France as a country on its own has its own data residency requirements, right? And though there's a broader data privacy framework that talks about transferring data between the transatlantic data flow, right? So yeah, governance is the core, I would say, and we can all agree is the core. And then the next is like ownership and location, where you put your data, right? Because where you put your data helps you to meet those requirements, right? So sovereign DBaaS allow end users to control the infrastructure, even within a public cloud. So you're not going to be using the managed service, right? But you can use those instances. It's AWS EC2 instances. You can you can set up auto scaling, right? In order to scale like your infrastructure when it reaches a certain threshold or something like that, using open source databases for flexibility. And you can run in any cloud, you can run on-prem in a co-located environment, varying your deployment. And the data plane, right, resides on the customer's private cloud or your on-prem environment. And we'll see that like from talking to organizations for security reasons, right? So why the control plane like can vary wherever like you want to put it, right? The sovereign DBaaS doesn't own the hardware, right? You own the hardware, you own the instances, wherever they are located, the virtual machines, the Kubernetes clusters, the bare metal, the PaaS offerings, right? And all this now gives you gives you ability to manage costs, right? Hence the next characteristics, next feature, right? You can manage the cost, right? Like the rising cost of is a major concern, right? Like we see with public DBaaS, right? It can be 3 times the bare metal. But when an organization, bare metal deployment, but when an organization is already locked into a certain DBaaS provider, or they don't really have the expertise, right, to build their own DBaaS or to move away, right? So they just close their eyes and keep paying the cost, right? Because it works. But then again, the costs keep increasing, right? And Sovereign DBaaS offers cost savings through open source technology, right? And this simplifies cost management because like you're not really paying for the software, right? You're not really paying for the software because it's open source. Then also a single pane of glass that provides a unified view across these environments. Because when you have database clusters deployed, right, on different environments, if you want to make changes or make upgrades or perform an action or perform replication, right, you have to go to this environment, and like that requires manual effort. So you can just see yourself, instead of paying, if the cost that you would have been saving, right, you'll be spending it on from a time perspective, right, which may require like hiring more engineers or people, right, which defeats the purpose of like having that sovereign DBaaS. So there's a need for that single pane of glass, right, and cost predictability, because you're using open source software, right, you're not really dealing with licenses and license change, and being able to distribute your workload, considering the examples I gave regarding like AI applications and stuff, right? And also on the security side, Sovereign DBaaS using a shared responsibility model that is common, right, among public cloud providers. But the difference is that in public cloud, right, the cloud providers take more significant role in ensuring security than sovereign DBaaS providers, right? Because with sovereign DBaaS, yes, the sovereign DBaaS provider will handle some compliance, right? and let's say performing penetration test, right? And some of the core like basics, right? While the customer have greater responsibility over their data security, right? So your rest assured. So giving for an example, right? Let's say the provider can, sovereign DBaaS provider will offer encryption of data at rest in motion, like using a VPN, it's by default, for example. However, for access, right, and configurations, you bring your own keys, right? And as a result, as an end user, as a sovereign DBaaS user, you manage all the key aspect of your security, right? You manage the keys, the rotation, storage in your personal vault, right? That can be away from wherever you're hosting your databases and wherever you deploy the control plane of sovereign DBaaS provider. Then user experience, like I mentioned, right? The core thing is to give that experience that they are already used to. So time it's almost, I think, 9 minutes more. So I'll hasten up in order for us to meet the 30 minutes time. But yeah, so user experience, right? Sovereign DBaaS provider should give you that experience that you're already used to, right? Let's say if you're coming from a cloud DBaaS perspective, or then again, if you're coming from an on-prem, like not having to use any automation tooling or any managed service, right? Should be able to give you a better experience, right? To satisfy like your needs, right? To make things easier, right? As you vary your deployment. Then manageability, like I mentioned, right? All the aspects. A database is not just it's not just you deploy, right? Like every application. So there are day two operations, handling upgrades, patching, backups, right? Failover, monitoring to know what's going on, alerting, like high availability, right? Like all these are the main core activities that go on in deploying, in managing a database, right? The day two operations. So your sovereign DBaaS provides that, right, as a fundamental, right? Overall, right, sovereign DBaaS provides automation capabilities while giving you control over your environment. So moving on, the next thing, right, benefits of sovereign DBaaS. We've already touched this like through the characteristics, right? And we can just list them, say control, right? Flexibility, manageability, latency, and performance, and also cost savings, right? Sovereign DBaaS, mainly ownership, right? Like I mentioned, ownership of the in-situ instance, ownership of your servers on-prem, right? Whether you're using VMware or any other provider, right? Ownership is a core aspect, right? Control ownership over the operational tasks. So I saw a question, meeting ends in 10 minutes. And I saw a question, are there any prerequisites we have to know to use sovereign DBaaS effectively? So let me just run through the rest of the slide, then I will like answer this particular question. So then going on how to sovereign DBaaS, right? So we've talked about all the good things and everything that's possible and like utopia, right? If you think about it, just making a joke, right? But then again, like how will you achieve this, right? It sounds so good to be true, but organizations are implementing it and like it's possible for you, right? And that's why we're building the community to get more people. So there are two paths, right, to choose. So either you be independent, right, or be interdependent. Right? Being independent involves procuring your own infrastructure, right? Building the custom software to handle every job from upgrades to failover, to monitoring, alerting, using open source software, right? This requires expertise and significant investment. Some organizations are doing that, right? And we see organizations, like I mentioned, being involved, being a data on Kubernetes ambassador. We see organizations that, yes, so I'm seeing a question, a quick walkthrough of how I can use sovereign DBaaS in my current it's cluster. Okay, I would get to that. Organization implementing sovereign DBaaS on Kubernetes, right? And using Kubernetes, deploying their databases on Kubernetes, right? Being interdependent in this way is like finding a middle ground, right? On building everything from scratch and buying a solution, right? And you would integrate your chosen infrastructure, whether it be on-prem, like as a varied infrastructure, right? With code and tools and all the software that function as the control plane to manage all these databases deployed at varied environment. So here's just like a quick example, right? So using cluster control. So cluster control is a database automation tool, right? So this example is a hybrid database clusters deployed and managed by cluster control. As you can see, right, some databases are deployed on AWS, or then some are on GCP, right? And then also on VMware in the primary data center, and also on secondary data center on Nutanix, right? So cluster control is a database automation tool that lets anyone, right, that lets you fully automate high available open source clusters and open source databases and proprietary databases on-prem, in the cloud, or both environments without giving up control, right? The great thing that I would say about cluster control, right, is the way it slots into any environment, providing you like a single pane of glass for your databases, right? And interfacing, right? There's the cluster control Terraform provider, right? That you can use if you use Terraform in your organization. There's the API, and we see organizations that use cluster control using fully the API, right? And there's also the UI, and this gives you the opportunity that if a day comes, you want to use Azure instead of Azure VMs, right? Or let's say DigitalOcean Droplet instead of AWS instances, right? Or let's say Linode, right? Or any other cloud provider, right? And you can just like easily swap it out and replicate your data to that environment, back up and replicate your data to that environment, right? In summary, it helps you standardize the life cycle of your database operations. Like I mentioned, several organizations use cluster control in their environment. So we have a few minutes left. So just go next Q&A. So I will start by answering the question. So the first question, are there any prerequisites we have to know to use Sovereign DBaaS effectively? So Sovereign DBaaS, it's not a particular tool, right? Sovereign DBaaS is just like DBaaS, database as a service, right? So there are several databases as a service, right? Sovereign DBaaS is the way you do DBaaS, right? Prioritizing sovereignty, prioritizing control, right? So the prerequisites would be having understanding, right, of what should be met, right? The features that should be met, right? Why exploring a provider? Why exploring tools that you can weave together to offer Sovereign DBaaS to your end users, whether you're a cloud provider offering database services, or whether like internal databases as an organization, right? So I don't know if that effectively answers your question, Daniel. Then the next question, say a quick walkthrough on how I can use Sovereign DBaaS in my current K8 cluster. So just like I mentioned, right, it's an idea. It's a way to implement a DBaaS, right? So like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we have further calls, right? And that is actually the next community call we're planning to walk through implementing deploying the Sovereign DBaaS on B clusters, right? So that's, we'll get into I'll share more details in the community, right? So obviously you have to be using a provider, right? A provider that gives you the DBaaS that has that feature, right? Or let's say for the example that I gave, cluster control that helps you manage your database, in the sense that you can take out cluster control anytime and not have issues with your databases, right? Any day, anytime, right? And your databases will still run, but requiring one effort, right? So that is a VMware environment. And also at several times, we are the creator of cluster control, also working towards giving you the ability to manage your database clusters in that manner, manner of giving you full control on K8. So that will be coming out very soon. We're currently working on that. And there are other tools we'll explore, and we're also working on the Sovereign DBaaS landscape, right? So there's a lot to come, and we'll share more insight, because we know that Kubernetes K8 is like, it's taking everyone, that's what everyone is talking about, right? So link to the community, yes. So you can just scan this URL, right, to the community. I will also share links you can also visit, let me just give me a second. I will get the link to the YouTube. I said YouTube. I'll get a link to the what we call it, LinkedIn, and is that LinkedIn page. So here it is. So this is linked to the LinkedIn page. I will also give you the link to the community, direct link to just join the community if you can quickly scan right now. It's coming right up now. Copy. Yes. So yeah, so you can just click this link and you be redirected to join the community immediately. So thank you all. Made it to the 3:30 mark. 3:30 my time. So wrapping up, right? Sovereign DBaaS offers a solution to challenges with cloud usage, right? Providing control, flexibility, cost savings in database management. It enables organizations to achieve operational efficiency and cost optimization. The most important thing there is cost, right? And control, right? Implementing Sovereign DBaaS is relatively easy today. Earlier on, it was quite hard. From a case perspective, a few years ago, operators were not as advanced as they are now, right? Database operators were not as advanced as they are, right? And cluster control have been existing for over past 13 years, right? So today, like, it's relatively easy to implement a sovereign DBaaS, all like the early days of DBaaS, right? Following the interdependency approach, right? Because not everyone can build everything custom, right? Or open source, fully open source approach, weaving together CNCF and cloud native technology, right? To integrate into your chosen infrastructure, integrate your code using like off-service, off-the-shelf solution like console control to function as a control plane, managing those upgrades, right? Giving you, managing the alerting and helping you back up, right? All from like a UI, like you already experienced with RDS or similar, right? And yeah, so that's about it. And thank you all for joining. You can just scan this one more time if you haven't to join the community. And if there's any question when you join the community, you can ask me anytime, no matter the time. I'm always there to like answer your questions. And you can always email me. And yeah, I follow the community of LinkedIn. I've shared the LinkedIn page. And that's about that. This is the end of the call. Thank you all for joining. I'll stop sharing now.